In a shocking and unprecedented turn of events, Austin Chumlee Russell, the beloved figure from Pawn Stars, has publicly implicated his father, Rick Harrison, in a case that is turning the world of reality TV on its head. Known for his larger-than-life personality and comical antics on the hit show, Chumlee's recent statements reveal a deeply unsettling truth. He claims that Rick Harrison, the patriarch of the gold and silver pawn shop, played a key role in the notorious Mike Wolfe case, a revelation that has sent shockwaves through the public and media alike. What seemed like an ordinary family business built on antique appraisals and quirky deals now appears to conceal a dark, complex web of secrets that could change everything we thought we knew about the Pawn Stars empire. The illusion of family and success. When Pawn Stars first premiered in 2009, it quickly became a cultural phenomenon. The show's mix of antique appraisal, history lessons, and comedic family dynamics struck a chord with viewers. Rick Harrison, the affable patriarch, was the star, with his son Corey and father, the old man, rounding out the iconic family trio. Together, they ran the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, a place where rare collectibles and priceless artifacts were bought and sold. What made the show so appealing was its portrayal of the Harrison family as a tight-knit, hard-working unit, a family business with deep historical knowledge and an eye for valuable items. Rick Harrison wasn't just the face of the business. He was the heart and soul of the operation. His expertise in antiques and his straightforward approach made him a trusted figure. Viewers admired his ability to haggle over prices and his wealth of knowledge about everything from Civil War memorabilia to vintage guitars. He seemed to embody the American dream, a self-made man who had built a business from the ground up, overcoming obstacles and achieving success through hard work and dedication. The first crack in the foundation, Corey's arrest. The first major sign that something was amiss came when Corey Harrison, the heir to the pawn shop empire, was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence, DUI. This event was more than just a typical celebrity scandal. It marked the beginning of a series of revelations that would tear apart the very foundation of the Harrison family. Corey's arrest was the first crack in the public image of the Pawn Stars family. Though the incident itself was shocking, it was nothing compared to what was to come. In the weeks that followed, Corey's behavior grew increasingly erratic. His arrest had become the catalyst for something much larger. What had once been an impervious family unit began to unravel. Corey, seemingly disillusioned with his father and the show's fabricated narrative, began to distance himself from Rick. The public facade of a happy family operating a pawn shop now seemed hollow, a mere front for a much darker reality. The real shock came when, in a cold, resolute voice, Corey made a statement that would forever alter the perception of Pawn Stars. "I no longer call him my father," Corey said, directed squarely at Rick Harrison. This declaration was not just an emotional outburst, it was a painful admission of the deteriorating relationship between father and son. For years, viewers had seen Corey as the loyal son and business partner, a fixture in the pawn shop who was supposed to inherit his father's legacy. The unseen world behind the pawn shop. The breakdown of Corey's relationship with Rick was just the beginning. In the wake of his shocking statement, more details began to surface, revealing the extent of the betrayal and the horrors that lay hidden behind the scenes. Corey, in a tell-all interview, exposed a network of criminal activity that stretched deep into the heart of Las Vegas. It was an operation so elaborate, so carefully concealed, that it had gone undetected for decades. Corey revealed that for years he had been aware of the dark secrets that his father had carefully hidden from the public eye. It began when he was just a teenager, still working at the pawn shop and learning the business from Rick. Late one night, while digging through the storage room for a set of old baseball cards, Corey stumbled across a locked filing cabinet. Inside, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Old, brittle photographs of human corpses, posed in unsettling, almost ceremonial arrangements. The bodies were eerily familiar to Corey. Some of them were people who had walked into the pawn shop, customers who had shared their stories and relics, only to vanish without a trace. These photographs were not just macabre. They were a clue to something much more sinister. But instead of confronting Rick, Corey did the unthinkable. He closed the drawer and locked it again, as if by sealing it away, he could silence the terror it sparked inside him. The discovery of the hidden room. The breaking point came one night when Corey was rummaging through Rick's car and found a suitcase filled with more photographs, more corpses, more evidence of a twisted operation that Rick had been running in the shadows. Each photograph was meticulously labeled, as if Rick had been cataloging his gruesome collection for years. Then came the discovery of the hidden room. It was located below the pawn shop, a space that had been kept secret from everyone, even Corey, who had worked there for years. The room was dimly lit by harsh surgical lights, its air thick with the stench of formalin, the chemical used to preserve human flesh. In the center of the room were bodies, preserved, dissected, and displayed like grotesque exhibits in a twisted museum of death. Corey's heart raced as he realized the full scope of what was happening in the place he had once called home. The horror did not end there. The FBI eventually raided the pawn shop, uncovering even more evidence of Rick's illicit activities. Hidden storage units filled with human remains were found, along with videotapes that featured Rick's unmistakable voice narrating his exhibits. The investigation revealed that Rick Harrison had been running a secret operation for years, trafficking in human remains and displaying them for a select group of wealthy collectors. The pawn shop, once thought to be a legitimate business, was a front for something much darker. The betrayal and the silence. As the investigation unfolded, Corey's silence became more ominous. He had witnessed the horrors firsthand, yet he remained silent for years. What had kept him quiet? Was it fear of his father? Fear of the criminal network that Rick had built? Or was Corey, in some way, complicit in the operation? The public began to question Corey's role in the dark secrets of the pawn shop. Was he a victim, or had he been an active participant in his father's twisted empire? The answers would never come easily. Corey's silence was deafening, and just when the public turned to him for answers, he vanished. No court appearances, no statements. Corey Harrison disappeared without a trace. The once familiar face of Pawn Stars was now a ghost, swallowed by the very darkness that had engulfed his family. When Corey finally resurfaced, it was in a quiet, dimly lit room. He was alone, speaking to a filmmaker who had once worked on Pawn Stars. Corey's voice was low, almost broken, as he admitted his complicity in the twisted legacy of the pawn shop. He spoke of the first time he had discovered the truth, when he was just 16 years old, uncovering the first photograph of a body locked away in the filing cabinet. From that moment on, he knew there was something deeply wrong, but he had been too scared to confront it. For Corey, the truth had been a burden too heavy to bear. But in the end, he couldn't carry it alone any longer. As he spoke, the weight of years of silence began to lift, revealing the horrors that had been hidden behind the bright lights of Pawn Stars. The Empire of Shadows. Rick Harrison's dark legacy. Rick Harrison was the man who embodied the American dream, a self-made millionaire, an entrepreneur with a sharp mind for business, and a reality TV star with an aura of charm and expertise that made him beloved by millions. He was the patriarch of Pawn Stars, the hit show that transformed a dusty pawn shop in Las Vegas into a cultural phenomenon. With his son Corey and the late old man, Rick cultivated a family brand that seemed to represent hard work, American history, and the fascinating world of antiques. The world watched as Rick's wit and knowledge brought the past to life, making Pawn Stars a trusted and comforting presence in millions of homes. But beneath the gleaming exterior of this iconic persona lay a grotesque and chilling truth, a truth that, until Corey Harrison's heartbreaking revelation, had been hidden in plain sight. It wasn't just that Rick Harrison was an expert in history, but that he had manipulated that very history to build a criminal empire that spanned decades. As the narrative unfurled through Corey's testimony, the once-beloved pawn shop became the twisted centerpiece of a horrific enterprise, built not on the preservation of history, but on the macabre obsession of using human remains as artifacts in a twisted, self-curated museum. Corey's awakening. The discovery that changed everything. The first moment Corey Harrison realized something was amiss wasn't marked by a violent confrontation or a shocking betrayal. No, it began with a simple filing cabinet in the back room of the gold and silver pawn shop. At just 16 years old, Corey had been finishing up his usual duties at the store, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, when he stumbled upon an old, rusted filing cabinet that seemed oddly out of place. What Corey found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life, and set in motion a series of events that would forever unravel the carefully crafted narrative of his family's business. The cabinet was chained shut, an unusual feature in the cluttered world of pawned treasures. But Corey's curiosity soon overcame any rational hesitation. With a few tools and a set of nerves that would soon be tested to their limits, he pried open the cabinet. Inside, time itself seemed to pause. There were photographs, but they were nothing like the typical memorabilia or dusty family photos one might expect to find. These were black and white images, meticulously staged and bizarrely posed. The bodies of the deceased, some unrecognizable, others eerily familiar, lay frozen in time, their eyes wide open in terror or resignation, their bodies contorted in ways that defied reason. The secret room, a shrine to the forgotten. As Corey's suspicions grew, so did his sense of isolation. He began to notice the inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in his father's behavior. Rick was disappearing for long stretches of time, often leaving the pawn shop late at night with a shovel in hand, his face blank and unreadable. He would return hours later, never explaining where he had been, always brushing off any questions with a wave of his hand and a comment about treasure hunting. But no treasure ever surfaced. There were no rare antiques, no valuable finds, only whispers and shadows. Then, one fateful night, Corey's worst fears were confirmed. It wasn't a grand discovery or a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet moment, almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. While driving Rick's SUV, Corey noticed a suitcase in the trunk. He had no reason to suspect anything unusual, but on a whim, he opened it. What he found inside ended any hope he had left that his father was simply eccentric or misunderstood. Inside the suitcase were photographs, high-resolution, color images of human corpses, carefully posed and lit. The handwriting on the back of each photo was unmistakably Rick's. Acquisition, 4 shoulder joint adjustment, 1997. One caption read, "Non-IL skull integrity check," another said, accompanied by a chilling note, "Ensure femur intact for historical value." The FBI raid, unveiling a hidden empire. Everything changed when the FBI launched a coordinated raid on storage units tied to Rick Harrison's business empire. What they uncovered was more horrific than anyone could have imagined. The storage units, under the name Harrison Asset Protection, LLC, contained the preserved bodies of 38 individuals, some frozen in industrial freezers, others displayed in glass cases, their personal effects carefully catalogued alongside them. The victims, some of whom were identified as missing persons from decades past, had been treated like rare antiques, their lives reduced to mere exhibits in a grotesque museum. Corey's journal was the key to unlocking the full scope of Rick's crimes. Over 200 pages of handwritten entries, photographs, timestamps, and scraps of evidence, each page more chilling than the last. It was his final act of defiance, his attempt to make amends for his silence. One entry described a place known as Storage Number 3, where investigators would later find the remains of conjoined twins. That single, chilling detail was enough to confirm everything Corey had feared. His father had crossed a line no human should ever cross. Rick Harrison, the delusional archivist, psychiatric experts later coined a term to describe Rick Harrison's twisted obsession: delusional archivist. It's a pathological condition characterized by a compulsion to preserve and curate human remains under the delusion that doing so prevents them from being forgotten. But for Rick, this obsession wasn't just about preservation, it was about control. He didn't just want to collect the past, he wanted to dominate it. The bodies were his trophies, posed and documented, displayed under cold lights as if frozen in time. It was his way of rewriting history in his own image, crafting a narrative that only he could control. The chilling truth about Rick Harrison wasn't just that he had committed unspeakable crimes. It was that he had done so under the guise of a beloved TV personality, a man trusted by millions. His public persona, the charismatic history buff, had been a masterful mask that hid the monstrous truth beneath. And for Corey, the son who had once idolized him, the truth was a betrayal too deep to fathom. As Corey's interview concluded, Elijah asked, "If your father is watching this, what would you say to him?" Corey's answer was simple, but devastating. "I'm not your son anymore." It was a final break, a rejection of the man who had not only destroyed his family, but twisted history into something grotesque. It was no longer a story of father and son, it was a story of survival, of truth, and of a legacy that would never be the same. The false facade of artifacts. The exhibits were presented with an air of credibility, each item framed within the narrative of historical significance. A skull purportedly from the Napoleonic era, a desiccated hand from a pre-Islamic Middle Eastern civilization, and, most disturbingly, a glass vial containing thick, darkened blood, marked Kennedy lineage, subject. These artifacts were not only displayed with an unsettling casualness, but were accompanied by stories of their historical importance. Harrison's voice, dripping with authority, had convinced countless people that they were witnessing the remnants of powerful histories, carefully preserved for the public to admire. At first, these artifacts were considered by many to be little more than an eccentric hobby of a man obsessed with history. But as forensic experts began to investigate, the truth started to unravel. What Harrison had paraded as historical relics were, in fact, human remains. DNA tests confirmed that the blood-filled vial contained the genetic material of missing persons from across the globe. The skull, far from being a Napoleon-era relic, was traced back to a missing woman from the Philippines. The genius of deception. How Rick Harrison manipulated the system. How was Harrison able to maintain this facade for so long? The answer lies in his brilliance, not just as a businessman, but as a manipulator of public perception. Rick's mastery over the media and his extensive television fame allowed him to remain untouchable, even as the horror within his pawn shop grew. He branded shipments of what were clearly human remains as antique film props or educational relics, artfully sidestepping customs inspections with the help of his media connections. He had become a master of presenting historical artifacts as part of his carefully constructed brand, one that had earned him trust, admiration, and, most crucially, access to global markets. His business operations were shielded by the popularity of Pawn Stars, a show watched by millions worldwide. It was no longer just a pawn shop, it had become a cultural institution, a symbol of Americana. In the eyes of the public, what took place within the walls of Gold and Silver Pawn was above reproach. After all, how could a man who had gained such widespread affection and fame through a hit television series possibly be involved in something as sinister as the trafficking of human remains? This was the core of Rick Harrison's brilliance. He had mastered the art of media manipulation and the creation of an image that was invulnerable to suspicion. The Hidden Archive: Secrets Beneath the Pawn Shop. Between 2012 and 2017, Corey Harrison, Rick's son and the heir apparent to the family business, began to notice disturbing discrepancies in the shop's inventory system. Nearly 20% of the items were listed as unknown origin and categorized as part of an internal archive that was not meant for public circulation. These items were not antiques, nor were they for sale. They were kept hidden away in the basement of the pawn shop, a space Rick referred to only as the archive. This was no ordinary storage room. It was a chilling, sealed-off area where Rick housed his most valuable and secretive artifacts. Corey, who had always looked up to his father, felt the weight of his growing suspicions but was unable to fully confront them. As he tried to access the ledger detailing the contents of the archive, Rick intervened, summoning him to a private meeting. Looking his son in the eye, Rick said something that would haunt Corey for years to come. "If you can open that vault, don't." His father's words were simple, yet chilling. Some things are heavier than money. It was a cryptic warning, one that Corey would only come to understand in the most tragic way possible. The Museum of Death: Rick Harrison's Delusion. What Rick Harrison had built was not a mere business. It was a macabre, hidden museum of death. It was a place where victims became exhibits, and their loss was obscured under the guise of scholarly preservation. The fabricated backstories accompanying the remains were chillingly detailed, each one designed to add an air of authenticity to the horrific reality. One particular corpse, displayed in ceremonial garb and tagged as a 19th-century Balkan warrior, was later identified through DNA testing as a missing Texas engineer, last seen in 2003. To Rick, every human life was a narrative to sell, a story he could rewrite to suit his own delusions of grandeur. This behavior, once revealed, was classified by modern criminal psychologists as a form of historical possession delusion, a rare and deeply disturbing condition where an individual believes they not only have the right, but the duty to preserve and protect human history, even if that history is built on stolen lives. This disorder was exacerbated by Rick's unchecked influence, both in the media and within his business. With over 500 episodes of Pawn Stars airing to a global audience of 80 million monthly viewers, Rick Harrison had the power to shape history in ways that were both profound and deeply harmful. Corey's guilt and the slow revelation of truth. While Rick Harrison operated his empire of death, Corey Harrison struggled with a sense of guilt that grew with every passing year. As the son of the man orchestrating the nightmare, Corey had been taught to view the world through the lens of history and preservation. His father had not abused or terrorized him. He had mentored him, teaching him the value of antiques, of historical preservation, and the art of negotiation. But as Corey grew older and more aware of the true nature of his father's operations, he began to feel the crushing weight of complicity. There was no dramatic moment of revelation, no single event that led to Corey's realization. Instead, it was a slow, painful accumulation of moments. A locked suitcase, a photograph found in a hidden drawer, a strange meeting with a potential buyer who seemed too interested in certain artifacts. Each small, ignored sign led Corey further into a nightmare, until the truth became undeniable. Yet, despite his growing understanding of what was happening, Corey remained silent. He later admitted that his silence was the hardest part to live with. "I didn't kill anyone. I didn't move any bodies," he would say. "But I saw the signs, and I said nothing. Maybe if I'd spoken sooner, someone would still be alive." The reckoning, Corey Harrison's role in exposing the truth. The moment Corey Harrison broke his silence was nothing short of transformative. It was a turning point not just for him, but for the millions of viewers who had once been captivated by the facade of Pawn Stars. When Corey spoke, he did so not to redeem himself, but to ensure that the truth was exposed, no matter how painful it might be. His confession wasn't polished, rehearsed, or sanitized. It was messy, it was real, and it carried the weight of a life spent in silence. Corey's words, "I didn't kill anyone, I didn't move any bodies, but I saw the signs, and I said nothing," echoed across the nation, and the media that had once celebrated Rick Harrison began to dismantle the myth of the affable pawnshop owner. But the fallout wasn't limited to the Harrison family. The revelations sent shockwaves through the entire television industry, with fans turning on the show and the networks that had aired it. Social media exploded with outrage, and forums once dedicated to discussing Pawn Stars now became spaces for grief and anger. The aftermath, a broken legacy. The legacy of Pawn Stars was shattered almost overnight. The History Channel, which had helped propel Rick Harrison to stardom, quickly pulled all episodes from its platforms, including Hulu, Amazon Prime, and YouTube. The network issued a public apology, acknowledging the profound betrayal of its viewers and the victims whose stories had been manipulated for profit. But the damage had been done. As investigations into Rick Harrison's involvement in international trafficking networks intensified, federal agencies, the Smithsonian Institution, and UNESCO began to piece together the full extent of his crimes. The artifacts housed in the Harrison family's hidden vaults had been looted from sacred sites across the globe. Ancient relics and human remains stolen from places like the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. The scope of Harrison's empire became clear, and with it, the immense cultural and moral damage he had inflicted. Corey's final act of redemption came not through seeking forgiveness or turning a profit, but by ensuring that the victims, the forgotten souls whose lives had been stolen and displayed as relics, were remembered. He worked tirelessly to identify the remains, to help authorities locate their families, and to establish a fund in honor of one particular victim, the first he had seen on display, whose face and name never left him. In the end, it was Corey Harrison's willingness to confront the darkness, to expose the truth behind his father's empire, that allowed the world to begin the difficult process of healing. The twisted legacy of Pawn Stars was forever linked to the suffering it had caused, but Corey's decision to finally speak out ensured that those who had been forgotten in the quest for profit would never be lost again.